So I'm Callie Justice, and tonight Donald and Tim and I, who are all members of the Action Circle, are going to be doing this presentation. In the Action Circle, we work on planning the actions and also leading them. So, and we've all been in actions and been arrested in actions, so we're bringing some experience to this presentation. So we're going to present information, as we've said in the publicity for this event. We're going to be presenting information about the various roles that are involved in doing the actions that we do. They're all carefully planned and have been, we keep learning as each time we do them. But each role is important. Some of them involve risk of arrest, high risk of arrest, and some don't. So we're going to check in with you all, like I said, later on, to see where you are in thinking about how you want to participate in our upcoming actions in August. So to begin, I'm going to share my screen so that you all can see these slides. And we're going to give you some information. And so Donald is going to get us started.
Thanks, Kelly. When someone goes into an action as a red, that means they've decided to non-violently break the law to the point of arrest. Just getting arrested and for doing something isn't meaningful in itself, of course. There has to be a context that gives it meaning. The context that gives meaning to declare emergencies actions is created by four essential elements. One, the action must be absolutely nonviolent on every level. Two, it must disrupt the public. People must be affected by it. They must feel that it has something to do with them personally. Three, the people doing the action must demonstrate willingness to sacrifice. Four, finally, the action must be done to advocate for a single clear demand that makes sense and has the potential to win wide popular support. Declare emergencies demand is that Joe Biden declare a climate emergency and use his emergency powers as president to do everything possible to stop climate catastrophe in ways that are fair and just. The lunch counter sit-ins of the American Civil Rights Movement in the early 1960s illustrate all four of these elements very clearly. And here we see a group of demonstrators sitting at a legally segregated lunch counter in Jackson, Mississippi. And just by sitting there together, these three people are breaking the law non-violently. You can see that one of the demonstrators is covered in ketchup and other gooey liquids. And you can see that the people standing behind them look upset, angry. They are the public, and they appear to have been disrupted by this action. The caption tells us that the man who was covered in condiments was also beaten on his back and head. Despite the assaults, the three remained seated, showing willingness to sacrifice for their demand, which was that Jackson desegregate its downtown restaurants and lunch counters. Next slide. Many of the participants in Declare Emergency actions make the sacrifice of breaking the law to the point of arrest. Seeing people choose to make this sacrifice can have a powerful impact. At the same time, the presence of people who do not intend to be arrested during an action also contributes to the success of the action in a variety of ways. Next slide. There's a shot of the same action a little earlier on. Eventually, the two women holding the banner would be arrested. The two women standing to the side, highlighted in the circle, would not. What made the difference? Why were two people arrested and two not? After all, all four were helping to stop the traffic. But the difference lies in the fact that in Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland, the law requires police to give well-amplified warnings to inform people who are blocking traffic that if they don't leave the road, they will be arrested. By law, they must give this warning 3 times before they can arrest someone for blocking the road. So while the two women standing to the side of the road did not contribute to the willingness to sacrifice element of the action. They did contribute to the disrupting the public element. And in fact, without them, the action could not have taken place at all. If they hadn't been standing in the road, cars could easily have gone around the roadblock. Next slide. There are several important roles that people play in actions that do not call for breaking the law to the point of arrest. Here you can see the woman dressed in black standing behind the roadblockers listening to an upset motorist. She is in a de-escalator role. She keeps an eye out for situations that call for extra support in dealing with angry or upset motorists. A de-escalator could also choose to sit down and join the roadblock to be arrested when the police arrive. But that is not a requirement for this role. The man in the picture was there live streaming the action on his social media. There are several photographers and news people who we routinely contact about declare emergency actions. The people standing at the back of this photo, inside the red circle, are the action leader, the traffic stopper, and a photographer. All of these roles bring no risk to very low risk of arrest.
Thanks, Donald. And in this slide, people are in the staging area just before a roadblock on the George Washington Parkway in Virginia, just across the river from DC, which took place during Declare Emergency's week of action this past April. They are gathered here in the last step before moving into the road. This is the time in an action when the jail support person collects items like keys and cell phones from folks who are risking arrest. It is very important that the jail support person not be arrested because they have everybody's stuff. And they are responsible for tracking everyone who is arrested from the moment of arrest until they are released, to advocate for them and to be sure that there are people there to meet them when they get out of jail. Now we'll look at a series of slides from the same action on the George Washington Parkway, just to give you a sense of how the different roles, both arrestable and the non-arrestable, work together during an action. Here, the group has moved out into the road and sat down, and they are getting themselves positioned to block the traffic. The man in the fancy camera is a representative of the news media. And you can see him in the group picture on the right side. That's the same guy with the backpack on the camera. Here, as motorists emerge from their cars to find out what is going on, you can see a woman standing on the sidelines taking photographs in the blue shirt there, blue long sleeve. It's very useful to have more than one photographer, because then what one misses in photographs, the other might get. And this shot gives a full view of the roadblock. We can see that it took 5 people and a fair-sized banner to block this road. Everyone was needed. And this is for a 2-lane road with not much of a shoulder on either side to include in the block. If we had shoulders, then we would need more people, right? But once the police arrived and began giving the series of 3 warnings, the police kept the traffic from moving forward so that 2 of the 5 original road blockers were able to leave the road and avoid arrest, while the disruption of having stopped the traffic continued through the arrest process. So this next transition is basically starting the arrest process. And in this slide, the woman who is talking with one of the people who remains in the road at this point is there in the role of police liaison. She acts as the go-between between the police and the roadblockers. An officer delivers the final warning before making an arrest. He checks with everybody in this case. Sometimes they get on a blowhorn and they speak to everybody at once. The way they did it here, it was different because they're a different jurisdiction in Virginia. Most of the original group stands along the side of the road. And we could note that this group was able to keep possession of the signs and the banners, but sometimes the police will take possession of these, so we try to get them off the road quickly. And the police consult with the police liaison person at the side of the road. And that's what's happening here. And actually for this roadblock, the first officers that arrived had to wait like an extra 15 or 20 minutes for the sergeant to get there. And then he was the one that actually led in conversations with the official police liaison here. So yeah, it does unfold in interesting ways. And this was all three of our arrestables remaining in the road, and the police are there, and they're holding the line. You can see an officer in the background. They're actually concerned with keeping traffic moving, headed in the other direction, because as you can imagine, the other side of traffic flow is affected too. And then arrests are started, and together people who act in the red roles and the people who acted in the more low risk roles succeeded in communicating in a very deeply felt way that we are in the midst of a climate emergency and that Joe Biden needs to do much more about it in his policy and in his administration's policy. And then, the news media picks it up and it goes out into social media and mainstream news. And that story just is amplified and it starts to affect a larger audience from there. And by the early afternoon, all three Reds are out of jail and celebrating together. And I'll turn it over to Callie.
You can unmute yourself.
You're on mute.
Okay, thank you. How many balls can I juggle at once? I don't know. So watching this slide series is just making me aware these decisions around risk are really ongoing. Like we're talking tonight, like there's one, you're going to decide if you're coming into an action intending to risk arrest, intending to be a person who stays after that third warning, or if this time you'd like to plan to be a placeholder in the road and then get up and leave and not be arrested or serve in some other role like jail support, which really needs to not be arrested. That's one level of decision. But this roadblock was in Virginia, as Tim just mentioned, and it brought up a whole other angle on risk because it was the first roadblock we had done in Virginia. We had a lot of experience blocking roads in Washington, D.C., and based on that experience, we could reasonably predict what people could expect, but we didn't have that experience in Virginia. We didn't know, how long people might be held. There was a lot more that was unknown. So the people who decided to do this action in making that decision were also deciding to take another level of risk because it's a strengthening thing for the group to move into other areas. It attracts more news media attention. It gets a better response if we do something different. So I really am appreciating that people did that in Virginia, and just wanting to make that point that these decisions around risk don't stop; they continue. I also wanted to mention before we have some time for questions and group discussion that there are two things that seem to me to be really essential to have in the backs of our minds, in the backs of our awareness at all times when considering the value of participating in this kind of action, of taking this kind of risk, and of doing something as disruptive as a roadblock is. Not all our actions are quite that disruptive, I think, but one of the things is this idea of proportionality. The kind of actions that we do with declare emergency only make sense in the context of being aware of how dire and drastic the effects of continuing to put carbon in the atmosphere and basically, murder by carbon, going to just genocidal scales, as the predictions have it doing in the coming decades. That's why we're doing this, and in a way, when people question why, what's the value of this kind of intense interruption of people's, after all, they're just going about their daily lives. They're not bothering anybody. Why are you messing with them? That question, in a way, it very much is really embedded in denial, in my opinion, about how bad things are and how drastic they're becoming. So what we're doing makes sense when you get the science and when you're willing to look hard enough at what that science means in terms of how real people are being affected, as well as much of the rest of life on Earth too. So there's that idea of proportionality. It is an appropriate response when you consider the situation. The other idea I find really rich and important to keep coming back to around the kind of actions we do is the awareness that our society, and probably it's a global thing, but certainly here in the US, polarization is just run rampant. And everybody has drawn their lines in the sand, and we're the good guys over here and they're the bad guys over there, so that nobody listens anymore. Everybody just has already got all their scripts worked out. The way that Roger Hallam has crafted the elements of the kind of nonviolent civil resistance that we do in declare emergency is designed really carefully, really thoughtfully, and I think really well, to absolutely minimize the amount of polarization. So we go into this in a lot of depth in the nonviolence trainings, but I thought it was important to mention it here, as people are here to think about how involved you want to be with the declare emergency actions. This is what, to me, one of the main things that makes what we do very different from what other groups do. We're not there demonstrating against car drivers. We're not, they're not our targets. We're there really to try and make a connection with people in a difficult circumstance. because we bring all four of those elements that Donald talked about in the beginning. So I did want to mention those things before we move into some questions and some group discussion, which is what we're going to do now. So let's turn off the recording part.